Welcome back to the Mountain Takes. I'm Isaac. Mountains don't kill people. People make choices, and mountains collect payment for those choices. Today we're looking at what happens when climbers make the wrong ones, when experience becomes arrogance, when confidence becomes blindness, when the people trying to save your life become invisible to you. This is what happens when you stop listening. Sit tight. It was May 18, 2024, at approximately 7:45 a.m. at Camp 4 on Mount Everest's south side. The altitude was 26,000 feet. The temperature was -38 degrees Celsius. A climber named Victoria Hartwell, age 52, was preparing for her summit push. Victoria was a successful real estate developer from San Francisco. She had paid $87,000 for her Everest expedition. She had hired a private guide. She had purchased premium supplemental oxygen. She had done everything that money could buy. What money could not buy was humility. Victoria Hartwell had arrived at Everest Base Camp on the 15th of April, 2024, already frustrated. She had expected a 5-star experience. Instead, she had found a basic tent community at 17,600 feet with no Wi-Fi, no hot showers, and food that she deemed unacceptable for the price. She had complained to the expedition operator repeatedly. She had demanded better accommodations. She had demanded that her guide prioritize her comfort over safety protocols. Her guide, a Sherpa named Tenzin with 19 years of experience, had attempted to explain that Everest Base Camp was a wilderness location, not a resort. Victoria had responded by threatening to leave a negative review on TripAdvisor. By the time Victoria reached Camp 2 at 6,500 meters, her behavior had already created friction within the expedition. She was slower than other climbers. She required more rest breaks. She complained about the cold, the food, the altitude, the physical demands. Tenzin was patient. He had worked with difficult clients before, but he was also experienced enough to recognize a pattern. Victoria believed that money entitled her to a different experience than other climbers. She believed that her resources should protect her from the normal rules of mountaineering. At Camp 3, Victoria experienced her first real symptom of altitude sickness. She had a headache and nausea. Tenzin suggested descending immediately. These were early warning signs of acute mountain sickness that could progress to cerebral edema at higher altitude. Victoria refused. She said she felt fine, that the headache was just dehydration, that she would feel better after more rest. Tenzin documented in his logbook that he had advised descent. Victoria refused. She said she had paid too much to turn back now. On May 18, Victoria and Tenzin left Camp 4 for the summit push. Victoria's oxygen saturation at Camp 4 was approximately 54%, critically low. Her breathing was labored. Her movements were slow. Tenzin suggested using supplemental oxygen immediately. Victoria said she would use it only if necessary. She had read online that using oxygen on Everest was cheating, that real climbers summited without it. Tenzin explained that he was not concerned with what online forums said. He was concerned with keeping her alive. Victoria told him that she was paying for his opinion, not for his fear. They began climbing. Within 2 hours, Victoria's condition was noticeably worse. Her coordination was declining. Her speech was becoming slightly slurry. Her judgment was visibly compromised. Tenzin began administering supplemental oxygen forcibly, overriding Victoria's preferences because he recognized that her brain was being destroyed by the altitude. By 11 a.m., Victoria was at approximately 27,500 feet and experiencing severe symptoms of high-altitude cerebral edema. Her brain was swelling. Her ability to make rational decisions had been replaced by confusion and obstinacy. At 11:47 a.m. on May 18, Victoria collapsed on the mountain at approximately 28,200 feet. Her oxygen saturation had dropped to 38%. Her body could no longer function. Tenzin attempted to support her, to keep her moving, to get her to lower altitude. But Victoria's weight, combined with her complete incapacity, made forward movement impossible. Tenzin called for assistance. Other guides and climbers nearby responded. They attempted to lower Victoria toward Camp 4. At 1:15 p.m. on May 18, at approximately 27,800 feet, Victoria Hartwell's respiratory system failed. She had been at extreme altitude for too long. Her brain had swelled beyond the point of recovery. Her lungs were filling with fluid from altitude-induced pulmonary edema. Her body simply stopped functioning. She died surrounded by guides who had done everything they could to keep her alive, guides who had been ignored and overruled by a client who believed her money entitled her to ignore the laws of altitude. Tenzin descended alone. He was traumatized. In interviews afterward, he said, "I told her 5 times. 5 times I said we need to go down. She said she was paying for the summit, not for my fear. The mountain doesn't care about money. It only cares about oxygen." It was May 22, 2024, at approximately 6:30 a.m. at Camp 4 on Mount Everest's south side. The altitude was 26,000 feet. The temperature was minus 40 degrees Celsius. A climber named Jennifer Blackwell, age 48, was preparing for her summit push. Jennifer was a successful pharmaceutical executive from New York. She had paid $92,000 for her Everest expedition through a premium operator. She had hired a private guide and a personal photographer. She had purchased every piece of equipment that existed. She had also purchased, in her mind, the right to do things her own way. Jennifer Blackwell had arrived at Everest Base Camp on the 10th of April, 2024, with specific expectations. She was an executive who made decisions affecting millions of dollars and thousands of employees. She was accustomed to people listening to her. She was accustomed to her opinions being treated as facts. She was accustomed to her will being the determining factor in outcomes. She had never encountered an environment where her will literally could not override the physics of altitude and oxygen. Her guide, a Sherpa named Pasang with 22 years of experience, had attempted to establish basic safety protocols from day one. Jennifer had rejected them. She wanted to climb faster than the acclimatization schedule allowed. She wanted to skip certain camps. She wanted to push harder and higher each day. Pasang had explained that the human body requires time to adjust to altitude. Jennifer had responded, "My body doesn't follow schedules. My body does what I tell it to do." By Camp 2, Jennifer's behavior had become problematic. She was pushing ahead of the group. She was ignoring rope protocols. She was attempting to climb sections of terrain that were beyond her technical skill level. Pasang had to constantly retrieve her from dangerous situations. He had documented multiple instances where Jennifer's decisions had created hazard for herself and other climbers. He had recommended she descend and attempt Everest in a future year when she would be better prepared. Jennifer had told him that his job was to follow her decisions, not to question them. At Camp 3, Jennifer experienced severe altitude sickness symptoms. Her oxygen saturation was 56%. She had a crushing headache. She was experiencing confusion and disorientation. Pasang recognized the signs of early cerebral edema. He strongly recommended immediate descent. He said her life was in danger. Jennifer said she had experienced worse hangovers, that she was fine, that they were continuing to the summit. Pasang documented his recommendation. Jennifer refused. On May 22, Jennifer and Pasang left Camp 4 for the summit push. Jennifer was moving slowly, moving poorly, moving dangerously. Her oxygen saturation was 51%. Her movements were uncoordinated. She was making poor decisions about rope placement and route selection. Pasang was essentially guiding a person whose brain was not functioning correctly, a person whose judgment had been destroyed by the altitude, while her confidence in that judgment remained completely intact. By 9:30 a.m., Jennifer was at approximately 27,200 feet. Her condition had deteriorated significantly. She was breathing heavily, even with supplemental oxygen. Her movements were becoming erratic. Pasang recommended stopping and descending immediately. Jennifer said they were almost to the summit, that she could feel it, that they were so close. She was hallucinating. The summit was still 1800 meters above her. Her brain was so damaged by lack of oxygen that it was creating false perceptions of reality. At 10:15 a.m., Jennifer collapsed. Her body could no longer support her weight or her movement. Pasang attempted to support her, but she was dead weight. He called for assistance. Other guides responded. They attempted to administer supplemental oxygen and to lower her toward Camp 4. But Jennifer's brain was already too damaged. She had been at extreme altitude too long. Her lungs were filling with fluid. Her body was in complete system failure. At 12:47 p.m. on May 22, at approximately 27,600 feet, Jennifer Blackwell died. She had ignored warnings from her guide 11 times, according to Pasang's logbook. 11 times he had told her they needed to descend. 11 times she had overruled him. The 12th time her body simply stopped responding. She died because she believed her will was stronger than the physics of altitude and oxygen. Pasang descended in silence. He did not work as a guide for the remainder of the 2024 season. In a statement to the expedition operator, he wrote, "I have guided for 22 years. I have guided people who were afraid, but who listened. I have guided people who were confident, but who respected the mountain. I have never guided someone who believed that being an executive made her immune to altitude. The mountain takes everyone equally. Money, experience, authority, none of it matters. The mountain only understands oxygen saturation and time at altitude. This woman understood neither." It was May 16, 2019, at Camp 4 on Everest at 26,000 feet. Victoria Ashford, 44, a venture capitalist from New York, had paid $110,000 for this expedition. Her guide was Pemba Sherpa, 38, with 16 years of high-altitude experience and 9 Everest summits. Victoria believed money entitled her to make all decisions. Pemba understood money bought her an experienced guide, nothing more. By Camp 2, Victoria wanted to climb faster than safe protocols allowed. She wanted to skip acclimatization days. Pemba had documented every recommendation to slow down. Victoria had rejected every one. By Camp 3, her oxygen saturation was 62%, dangerously low. Pemba recommended descending. Victoria said she had a board meeting in 2 weeks and would not turn back. At Camp 4, the weather forecast was marginal. Pemba recommended waiting another day for a better window. Victoria said they were going tonight. Pemba said the risk was too high. Victoria told him she was paying for guidance, not his fears. They left Camp 4 at 11:45 p.m. on May 16th. By 2 a.m., they were at 27,200 meters. The weather had changed. Wind was increasing. Clouds were moving in from the south. Pemba checked his satellite forecast. The window had collapsed. A storm was moving in faster than predicted. He told Victoria they needed to descend immediately. Victoria said they were too close to summit. Pemba said the summit was 1,800 meters above them. They couldn't reach it before the storm arrived. Victoria said she would summit even if she climbed alone. Do you understand what Pemba was facing? A client who understood the danger and chose to ignore it anyway. They reached 27,600 meters at 4:30 a.m. The storm had arrived early. Wind was gusting above 60 kilometers per hour. Visibility was less than 10 meters. Pemba's face was numb. Victoria's hands were frozen solid. Pemba told Victoria they were turning around. Victoria said she could see the summit. She was hallucinating. Pemba physically grabbed her harness and tried to turn her around. Victoria resisted. Pemba had to drag her downward by force. The descent from 27,600 meters in a whiteout with a client who was hallucinating was the most dangerous situation Pemba had faced. They moved slowly. The wind pushed them both toward exposed edges. At 6 a.m., Victoria collapsed. Pemba tried to help her up. She was unconscious. Pemba tried calling for help on his radio. Too much static. He realized if both of them stayed, both would die. He left Victoria at 27,400 meters at 6:45 a.m. on May 17th. Pemba descended to Camp 4 by 10:30 a.m. with severe frostbite on both hands and feet. A rescue attempt was organized, but by the time rescue climbers reached 27,000 meters, the storm had worsened. They found Victoria unconscious at 27,200 meters. She was already deceased. Pemba had begged her to descend 7 times. She had refused. Victoria died because she refused to listen to the one person whose entire job was keeping her alive. Pemba survived with frostbite damage, but never guided again. It was July 8, 2020, at Camp 3 on K2 at 7,400 meters. Rachel Morgan, 41, a pharmaceutical executive from Boston, had paid $135,000 for this expedition. Her guide was Dorje Sherpa, 35, with 16 years of experience and 5 K2 summits. Rachel had told her company she would return in 9 days with a summit video. Rachel had told her followers she was unstoppable. These commitments were driving her decisions at altitude. Rachel had arrived at base camp on June 20th with a film crew. She was climbing Everest and K2 in the same season without supplemental oxygen, designed to generate content for her personal brand. Dorje had explained that combining 2 8,000ers without oxygen was extraordinarily dangerous. fitness. Rachel had responded that her body was stronger than most people's. Dorje had documented his concerns. Rachel had refused. By Camp 2, her acclimatization was poor. Her oxygen saturation was 61%, alarmingly low. Dorje recommended descending and attempting K2 the following year. Rachel said she had media commitments. Dorje documented his recommendation. Rachel refused. By Camp 3, she was coughing constantly, a sign of pulmonary edema, fluid building in her lungs. Dorje recognized the symptoms immediately. Without descent, it would become fatal within 24 hours. On July 8th, a brief weather window opened. Rachel insisted on summit that night. Dorje said she was too sick. Rachel said she felt fine, that the cough was just dry air irritation. Dorje said pulmonary edema was not an irritation, it was a medical emergency. Rachel said she was the only one who understood her body. Dorje said at 7,400 meters, all bodies responded the same way. They broke down. Rachel told him to prepare for summit, or she would file a complaint about his performance. They left Camp 3 at 10 p.m. on July 8th. Rachel was moving slowly. Her breathing was labored. With each step, she coughed. Wet, productive coughs indicating fluid in her lungs. By 2 a.m. on July 9th, they were at 7,800 meters. Rachel's movements were becoming uncoordinated. Her speech was slurring. She was experiencing confusion. Her brain was being damaged by extreme altitude and severe hypoxia. Dorje told Rachel they were turning around immediately. He told her that if they continued, she would die. Rachel said she had promised her followers she would summit. Do you see the pattern? A guide begging, a client refusing, a mountain waiting. They climbed together through July 9th. Rachel's condition deteriorated with each 100 meters. By dawn, she was at 8,200 meters. Dorje checked her oxygen saturation, 38%. Critical. Dorje forced her to descend. Rachel was too weak to resist. She was compliant but confused, moving mechanically without awareness. They were descending through the bottleneck, a narrow gully between 7,600 and 8,000 meters, where massive seracs hang above the route. Seracs become unstable as the sun warms them. Dorje knew this. He was moving fast, supporting Rachel's full weight as they descended. At 2:30 p.m. on July 9th, a serac above them fractured. The ice block fell directly above them. Dorje heard the sound and looked up. He saw the falling ice. He tried to pull Rachel out of the fall zone. He wasn't fast enough. The impact struck both of them. Dorje was hit across his left side and back, ribs fractured, left arm crushed. Rachel was struck on the head. She died immediately. Severe head trauma. Dorje remained unconscious with severe injuries for 4 hours. He died at 6:45 p.m. without ever regaining consciousness. Dorje's body was left on K2. Rachel's body was recovered by a separate expedition. The investigation concluded Rachel had pushed too high despite severe pulmonary edema. She had refused to descend despite clear medical warnings, and a guide with 16 years of experience died because he refused to abandon her. Arun Kumar Tiwari was 53 years old when he arrived at Mount Everest Base Camp in April 2026. He was a senior director at an IT company in Hyderabad, India, the kind of person who builds software systems that other people depend on, who makes decisions in air-conditioned offices, who manage teams and budgets and timelines. For 20 years, his life had been calculated. Spreadsheets, performance reviews, 5-year plans. But there was one thing in his life that couldn't be calculated, couldn't be managed, couldn't be controlled through will alone: Mount Everest. Arun was not new to mountains. He had summited Mount Elbrus in Russia to Europe's highest peak at 18,510 feet. He had stood on top of Mount Denali in Alaska at 20,310 feet. He had reached the summit of Mount Aconcagua in Argentina at 22,841 feet. He had climbed other peaks that most people will never even know exist. He was an accomplished mountaineer by any measure, but Everest is different. Everest doesn't care about your other summits. Everest doesn't acknowledge your experience. Everest only cares about whether you respect it enough to survive it. In 2025, Arun made his first attempt at Everest. He trained obsessively for months. He did altitude chamber training. He ran fitness regimens that would have exhausted younger men. He bought the best equipment. He hired experienced guides. He had prepared in every way that preparation is possible. And then he climbed. He pushed through the lower camps. He acclimatized. He moved up the mountain with the discipline of a man used to executing plans. But at 7,200 meters, still almost 3,000 meters below the summit, his body rebelled. Health complications forced him to turn around. He had to descend. He had to go home. He had to admit that despite all his planning, despite all his experience, despite all his will, the mountain had rejected him. That failure haunted him. For 12 months, it consumed him. This was the last thing Arun needed to prove. This was the final mountain on his list. This was the achievement that would define his mountaineering legacy, and he had failed. So in 2026, he returned. He was older now, at 53. He was still fit, but his recovery times were slower. His body was less forgiving than it had been at 52, but he didn't care. He had one last chance, one last climbing season where the weather window would align with his schedule, one last opportunity to do this before time made it impossible. He came back to Everest with a desperation that only comes from a second attempt. This time, everything felt different. The weather in May 2026 was favorable. The route was well established. He had the advantage of knowing what to expect this time. He wasn't a climber anymore who was wondering what Everest would throw at him. He had already been rejected once. Now he was coming back, not with hope, but with something more dangerous than hope. He was coming back with certainty. He was coming back convinced that he had learned the lessons the mountain had taught him in 2025. He was coming back thinking that knowledge plus experience plus willpower would equal success. By May 20th, Arun was at Camp 4 at 26,000 feet, waiting for the weather window to open for the summit push. The forecast was good. The next morning, May 21st, the team began their assault on the summit. Arun moved faster than his guide recommended. His oxygen saturation was lower than it should have been for his fitness level, but Arun felt strong. He felt ready. He felt like this was finally his moment. His guide called for him to slow down. Arun kept pacemaking. By 4 a.m., he had covered more distance than planned. He was ahead of schedule. He was ahead of his guide. He was ahead of the reality of where his body actually was, at 28,000 feet. At 5:30 p.m. on May 21st, 2026, Arun Kumar Tiwari placed his foot on the summit of Mount Everest. He was standing at 29,032 feet, on a platform of ice and rock smaller than a dinner table at the highest point on Earth. The sun was setting. The sky was turning orange. He could see for hundreds of miles in every direction mountains below him, clouds below him, the entire world arranged beneath his feet. He took photos. He stood there for approximately 15 minutes, and in those 15 minutes, he made a critical decision. He told his guide he felt strong. He said he wanted to descend immediately. He said he didn't want to rest at the summit. He said he wanted to move fast. This was the mistake that would kill him. The descent from Everest's summit is 3,000 meters of vertical drop through the most dangerous terrain on the mountain. It is technically less demanding than the ascent, but physiologically, it is far more deadly. Your body is exhausted. Your oxygen is depleted. Your judgment is already compromised by hypoxia, and you have to navigate fixed ropes, rappel sections, navigate crevasses, and manage unbelievable exposure. Arun began his descent at around 6 p.m. His oxygen saturation was approximately 55% critically low. His brain was being starved of oxygen. His decisions were no longer being made by the Arun who had built a successful IT career. His decisions were being made by a man whose prefrontal cortex was literally shutting down from lack of oxygen. By 6:30 p.m., as Arun descended through the South Summit section, he began to feel nauseous. By 6:45 p.m., he was vomiting. His guide moved closer to him, asking if they should find shelter, asking if they should rest, asking the questions guides ask when they know something is wrong. Arun said he was fine. He said the nausea was temporary. He said they should keep moving. They kept moving. And then, near the Hillary step at around 7:15 p.m., the vomiting became something else. There was blood in it, bright red blood. This is not a normal response to altitude. This is a sign that something critical is happening inside the body. High altitude pulmonary edema HAPEs. When fluid begins to accumulate in the lungs at extreme altitude, the body can't process oxygen efficiently. The alveoli fill with fluid. The person essentially drowns on dry land. The symptoms are coughing, sometimes blood-tinged sputum, extreme fatigue, difficulty breathing. High-altitude cerebral edema HACEs, when the brain begins to swell from fluid accumulation. The symptoms are confusion, loss of coordination, irrational decisions, hallucinations, loss of consciousness. Arun had at least one of these conditions, possibly both. His guide radioed for additional support. The communication was choppy. Two other Sherpa climbers who had been assisting other clients on the mountain received the distress call and began moving toward Arun's position. By 8 p.m., there were now 4 people with Arun's primary guide and 3 Sherpa climbers. They were all trying to bring him down from the Hillary step. They were all trying to move as fast as safely possible in the dark with a man whose body was failing. By 8:30 p.m., Arun could barely walk. The Sherpas were now physically holding him, using his harness to lower him down the fixed ropes, dragging him through sections of the mountain where one mistake means a 1,000-foot fall into darkness. At 9 p.m., they had descended approximately 300 meters from the Hillary step. Arun's condition was worsening. His confusion was increasing. His body was moving only because the Sherpas were moving it. One of the guides later reported that Arun asked them where they were. They told him they were descending to Camp 4. Arun said, "Which mountain are we on?" This is what extreme hypoxia does. It erases your sense of reality. You literally don't know what mountain you're climbing. By 9:30 p.m., they were still trying to reach Camp 4. Arun's oxygen saturation had dropped to approximately 48%, a level at which the human brain cannot sustain consciousness much longer. His breathing was shallow. His movements were mechanical. The Sherpas were holding him, guiding him, trying to keep him moving down. At 9:47 p.m., just meter below the Hillary step, Arun's body gave out completely. His heart had taken too much punishment. His lungs had filled too much with fluid. His brain had suffered too much oxygen deprivation. His systems began to shut down. The Sherpa guides recognized what was happening. They knew this was a medical emergency at 28,200 feet in the darkness. One of them began administering emergency first aid. They gave him supplemental oxygen. They began CPR. They performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation on a man at extreme altitude and sub-zero temperatures in the darkness, with nothing but headlamps and their own strength. They did this for 11 minutes. They didn't stop because they had hope. They continued because this was what guides do. This was what Sherpas do. Even when they know it's impossible, they try anyway. At 10:47 p.m. on May 21st, 2026, Arun Kumar Tiwari's heart stopped. Despite the efforts of 4 experienced Sherpa guides, despite supplemental oxygen, despite CPR performed by people who have saved lives on this mountain before, Arun could not be resuscitated. The mountain had rejected him for a second time, but this time it was permanent. The news was relayed down the mountain. Expedition organizers were informed. His family in Hyderabad was notified. His wife, Meenakshi, learned that her husband had reached the summit of Everest and then died on the way down. She learned that his body was still on the mountain at 28,200 feet, just below the Hillary step, in the death zone where it would remain frozen in ice forever. The question then became, what do you do? Do you attempt a recovery? Do you try to bring the body down? Pioneer Adventures owner Nivesh Karki provided the facts. Recovery from 28,200 feet requires a team of 8 to 12 highly trained Sherpa guides. It requires multiple days of work in sub-zero temperatures. It requires cutting a frozen body out of ice using specialized tools. It requires lowering that body down thousands of feet, avalanche-prone terrain using ropes. It requires massive amounts of bottled oxygen because the guides need to breathe too. It requires a cost of approximately 90 lakh Indian rupees, roughly 94,000 US dollars. And even with all of that effort, the chances of successfully recovering a body from the Hillary step are extremely low. Insurance provided by the expedition company covers helicopter evacuation, but not manual body recovery. The logistics are nearly impossible. The dangers are extreme. The cost is prohibitive. And the success rate is discouragingly low. So Arun's family made a decision. They decided to leave him on the mountain, not out of indifference, not out of inability to afford recovery, but out of faith. Arun's brother-in-law, Sudhir Upadhyaya, gave a statement to media. He is in Lord Shiva's abode. The process of bringing the body back would have been very badly damaged by the time it reaches us. Such operations, there are not known to be successful. The family decided that Arun Tiwari would remain on Mount Everest, frozen at 28,200 feet, just below the Hillary step, in the exact location where his heart stopped. He had spent 20 years building a successful career, accumulating achievements, climbing mountains on 6 continents. He had failed once and returned for a second attempt. He had reached the summit of his final mountain, and then the mountain took everything. His body now sits on Everest at the Hillary step, a permanent resident of the death zone, where the temperature never rises above -40 degrees Fahrenheit, where the wind howls at over 100 miles per hour, where he will remain preserved in ice indefinitely. Future climbers will pass by him. They will see a figure in climbing gear frozen against the ice. They will wonder who this person was, what their story was, what brought them to this place. They will never know that his name was Arun Kumar Tiwari. They will never know that he was 53 years old. They will never know that he came back for a second chance and lost everything. This is what the mountain keeps, not your achievements, not your summits, not your dreams. It keeps your body preserved forever at the place where your ambition exceeded your respect for the reality of extreme altitude. I'm Isaac from the Mountain Takes. If you've ever pushed too hard for something you wanted, if you've ever ignored the warning signs from your own body, if you've ever convinced yourself that you were strong enough to do the impossible, subscribe for more stories of mountains that teach lessons that cost lives. I'll see you on the next descent. It was May 20th, 2026, at approximately 8 a.m. when Sandeep Are reached the summit of Mount Everest. The morning was clear. The visibility was perfect. He could see for hundreds of miles in every direction the curvature of the earth visible beneath him, clouds arranged thousands of feet below like a white ocean. He stood on the highest point on earth and took photos. Tulasi Reddy, his climbing partner of 50 days, was somewhere behind him on the mountain, also making his push toward the summit. Sandeep had trained hard for this moment. He had invested months of preparation, enormous expense, and the physical and mental endurance required to reach 29,032 feet. He had reached the summit. He had made it. The rest was supposed to be the easier part, the descent, getting down, going home to his 17-year-old son waiting in Arizona. But Sandeep Are was 46 years old, and he didn't know what Arizona meant anymore. Not really. He had been born in India, had climbed in the Himalayas as a young man, understood mountains the way only someone from India can understand mountains. But he had lived in Arizona for years. He had become an American climber, hiking the Grand Canyon rim to rim, preparing his body in the desert. He had brought his climbing partner Tulasi with him to Everest as more than a partner, as a best friend, someone he had spent 50 days with at altitude, someone he had shared the trial of climbing with. Tulasi had said of him, he was super strong climber, not just physically strong, the kind of strength that comes from having something to prove to yourself. The descent from the summit began at approximately 9 a.m. on May 20th. Sandeep started carefully, following the fixed ropes, moving methodically through the south summit area. The route was crowded. May 21st had been the projected weather window for most expeditions, but some teams were taking their shot on May 20th. There were other climbers on the mountain, other people moving up and down, all trying to navigate the same fixed ropes, the same sections of terrain that killed people every season. Sandeep moved down slowly. He didn't rush. He understood the mountain enough to know that rushing kills more people than caution. By noon, he was passing through the level terrain between the south summit and Camp 4 at 26,000 feet. His eyes had been exposed to extreme altitude conditions for hours. The sun reflecting off snow and ice creates an intense glare at sea level. At 28,000 feet, that glare becomes something else. The UV radiation is unfiltered by atmosphere. The reflection. Off-white ice and snow is blinding literally. Climbers wear specialized glacier glasses with dark lenses to protect their eyes, but nothing fully protects you from extreme altitude sun exposure. Nothing fully prevents the damage. Sandeep's eyes began to burn. This was normal, every climber experiences this, but the burning didn't stop. It intensified. By 1 p.m., as he continued his descent below the south summit, his vision began to blur. This was no longer normal altitude eye strain. His eyes were inflaming. The delicate tissue on the surface of his eyes, the epithelium, was being burned by UV radiation and dehydration. Snow blindness, photokeratitis, had begun. He couldn't see clearly anymore. The terrain in front of him was becoming a white blur. The fixed ropes he was following were becoming harder to locate. The steps he needed to place his feet on were becoming indistinct. Sandeep's guides moved closer. They could see something was wrong. His movements had changed. His pace had slowed further. They were asking him questions in Nepali, in English, trying to assess his condition. Sandeep told them his eyes hurt. He said the sun was bright. He said maybe if they descended faster, got to lower altitude where the air was thicker, where the sun exposure wasn't so intense, his eyes would improve. So they descended faster. But the faster descent created new problems. At extreme altitude, descending faster means less acclimatization time between camps, less recovery time for the body. Sandeep's oxygen saturation was already critically low from the summit push. His body was already compromised by exhaustion and thin air. His brain was already being starved of oxygen. And now he was pushing his body harder, making it work faster when it was already at the breaking point. By 2:30 p.m., his eyes weren't just burning, he was losing vision. Colors were becoming unclear. Shapes were becoming ambiguous. He was moving down a mountain he could no longer see clearly, being guided by men whose voices he could hear but whose faces were becoming indistinct. This is when altitude sickness compounds with physical injury. This is when the body starts failing on multiple fronts simultaneously. Sandeep's guides recognized the severity now. This wasn't eye strain. This was snow blindness progressing rapidly. They called for additional support. Other Sherpa guides from lower camps began moving up to intercept them. The word was passed down the mountain. Climber in distress, vision loss, need additional hands to bring him down. By 3 p.m., Sandeep Are could not see. Total blindness. Not vision impaired, not reduced vision blind. His eyes had been exposed to extreme UV radiation for almost 7 hours straight of altitude. The epithelial cells of his corneas had been fried. His tears had evaporated in the dry air. His eyes had simply stopped working. He was now a blind man at 26,500 feet on a mountain that kills people who can see everything. He was being guided by touch, by voice, by the physical contact of Sherpa hands on his body, telling him where to step, how to move, when to breathe. At this point in the story, most people would have turned around completely. Most climbers with total vision loss at high altitude would say, "Find a way to get me to shelter, get me oxygen, get me down immediately." But at extreme altitude, there is no immediately. There is no helicopter rescue. At 26,500 feet, there is only the incredibly slow process of hand-guiding a blind climber down a mountain where one mistake means a 1,000-foot fall in any direction. One mistake means death, and Sandeep's guides had to make that walk anyway. They had to get him down. They had no other choice. 5 Sherpa guides were now with Sandeep Are. They had established a human chain. One guide in front, one behind, guides on either side, and Sandeep in the middle, literally being lowered down the mountain. He was holding on to ropes, but he wasn't navigating them. The guides were navigating for him. Step left, step right, hold the rope, don't let go. Lower yourself slowly. There's ice here. Watch the slope. The guides were giving constant verbal instructions because Sandeep's eyes were absolutely useless. But there was another problem developing. Snow blindness was one issue. But at extreme altitude, the body under extreme stress often experiences other acute conditions simultaneously. Sandeep was showing signs of high-altitude cerebral edema-HACE-swelling of the brain from oxygen deprivation and fluid accumulation. His confusion was increasing. He was asking where they were. He was forgetting instructions seconds after receiving them. He was becoming disoriented. The guides recognized HACE symptoms. They knew this was critical. A climber with HACE can lose consciousness suddenly. A climber with HACE can die very quickly. They descended through Camp 4 around 5 p.m. Sandeep was given supplemental oxygen. Medical supplies were used. The guides worked with him, trying to stabilize his condition, trying to keep him conscious, trying to keep moving downward. Every meter of descent meant the air was slightly thicker, the oxygen levels were slightly higher, the chance of survival was slightly better. But every meter also meant more exposure, more time at altitude, more chance that his body would fail completely. By 7 p.m., they had reached Camp 3 at approximately 23,500 feet. Sandeep was still blind. He was still showing signs of HACE. He was disoriented. He was confused. His body was failing in multiple ways simultaneously. The guides gave him more oxygen. They hydrated him. They tried to restore some level of consciousness and stability. They had to get him to Camp 2, which was another 2,500 feet of descent, another several hours of work guiding a blind man down a mountain. The decision was made. Continue the descent through the night. Don't stop. Don't rest. Just keep moving down, because staying at altitude is death, and the only thing that might save Sandeep Are is getting him to lower altitude where his brain can begin to recover, where the oxygen levels are higher, where emergency medical care is available. The guides roped him off. They began the night descent with headlamps cutting through darkness, guiding a blind man down a mountain he couldn't see, in temperatures that would freeze exposed skin in minutes. Between 9 p.m. and midnight, they navigated below Camp 3 toward Camp 2. The terrain got slightly easier as they descended. The air got slightly thicker. Sandeep's condition was still critical, but at least the immediate danger of extreme altitude was decreasing with every meter down. The guides were exhausted. They had been working non-stop for hours, but they kept moving. This is what guides do. This is what Sherpa climbers do. When someone's life depends on them, they keep moving. By 1:30 a.m. on May 21st, they reached Camp 2 at approximately 21,000 feet. Sandeep Are was brought into a tent. Medical assessment was immediate. His eyes were severely damaged, snow blindness confirmed, but he was below the altitude where immediate death from HACE was likely. His oxygen saturation was approximately 58% low, but survivable at this altitude. He was confused, but conscious. He was alive. They had gotten him down alive. The guides gave him supplemental oxygen. They administered medications for HACE. They hydrated him. They kept him warm. They did everything that could be done at 21,000 feet in the middle of the night. In a tent, Sandeep Are had successfully summited Mount Everest. He had overcome extreme altitude, extreme weather, and the physical limit of human endurance to reach the summit. But on the descent, his eyes had failed him. His brain had swollen. His body had said no more, and all the guides' effort, all their skill, all their willingness to keep moving it had gotten him to Camp 2 alive, which seemed like survival. But survival at 21,000 feet at midnight after extreme altitude sickness is not the same as being out of danger. The altitude is still dangerous. The lack of oxygen is still severe. The body is still compromised. HACE doesn't reverse quickly. Just because you're at a lower altitude, it continues to progress. The swelling in the brain continues. The brain can herniate. The respiratory system can fail. At 2 a.m. on May 21st, Sandeep Are's condition began to deteriorate again. His breathing became irregular. His consciousness began to fade. The guides kept him on oxygen. They kept trying. But the swelling in his brain had progressed too far. The damage was too extensive. At approximately 3:30 a.m. on May 21st, at Camp 2 at 21,000 feet, with 5 Sherpa guides around him, with oxygen flowing into his lungs, with men who had spent hours trying to save his life holding his hands in the darkness, Sandeep Are's brain gave out. The swelling was too much. His respiratory system failed. He died not from falling, not from avalanche, not from the immediate catastrophe that people imagine when they think of mountain deaths. He died from the mountain's slow torture. He died from a combination of conditions. He died from being a blind man at extreme altitude, whose body simply ran out of function. And the hardest part of this story isn't that he died. The hardest part is that his family in Arizona would never see his body. His 17-year-old son would never get to say goodbye to his father, because Sandeep Are died at Camp 2. And bringing his body down from Camp 2 is logistically complex. Bringing a body from 21,000 feet down to base camp requires additional porters, additional risk, additional resources. So his family made the decision: leave him on the mountain. His body remains at Camp 2 at 21,000 feet, preserved in the cold, a permanent resident of the place where his lungs failed. Tulasi Reddy, Sandeep's climbing partner and best friend for 50 days on the mountain, gave a statement to media. He was the strongest climber I have ever met. On the mountain, none of that strength matters. The altitude doesn't care how strong you are. It just takes what it needs. On May 20th, Sandeep Are could see everything the world laid out beneath him from the summit. By May 21st, he was blind. His brain was swelling, his body was failing, and his journey up ended in a way he never imagined possible when he was taking those summit photos in the morning sun. This is what Everest does. It gives you the summit and takes away everything else. It gives you the achievement and takes away your sight. It gives you the victory and takes away your son's father. It gives you 50 days of climbing with your best friend and then separates you forever at 21,000 feet. I'm Isaac from the Mountain Takes. If you've ever pushed your body beyond what it could handle, if you've ever ignored the signals that something was wrong, if you've ever convinced yourself that strength alone is enough to overcome any obstacle, subscribe, because there are more stories of mountains that teach these lessons at the cost of lives. I'll see you on the next descent. It was the morning of May 3, 2026, on the trail between Gorak Shep and Everest Base Camp. Gorak Shep sits at 16,942 feet, the last inhabited settlement before the climb begins, a small cluster of stone lodges, surrounded by the gray moraine of the Khumbu Glacier. Base Camp sits at 17,500 feet, just 2 miles away. For trekkers, this stretch is considered routine. It's not technical. It's not steep in any dangerous sense. There are no crevasses to navigate, no fixed ropes, no avalanche zones. Thousands of people walk this exact path every season, many of them tourists who have never climbed anything in their lives. It is, by every definition used in mountaineering, safe. Lakpa Dende Sherpa was walking this trail on the morning of May 3rd. He was 52 years old. He was returning to base camp to begin his season as a high-altitude guide for 7 summit treks. the same company he had worked with for over a decade. This wasn't his first season. It wasn't his 10th. This was a man who had been walking toward Everest in one form or another for 25 years. He had done this walk more times than he could probably count. The trail held no mystery for him. The altitude held no surprise. He knew every rock, every turn, every place where trekkers stopped to catch their breath. Somewhere along that 2-mile stretch, Lakpa Dende lost consciousness. He collapsed. The exact moment isn't recorded in detail. There was no avalanche to trigger an alarm, no fall that anyone witnessed, no storm that forced an emergency response. He simply stopped. Other people on the trail, or members of his own team, found him. They tried to help, but by the time anyone could act, it was already over. Lakpa Dende Sherpa was dead on a trail he had walked dozens of times. 2 miles from a destination he had reached more times than he could count. To understand why this matters, you need to understand who Lakpa Dende Sherpa was and what 25 years at extreme altitude actually does to a human body. He came from Gudul, a small village in the Salukumbu district, the same region that has produced generations of the world's most accomplished high-altitude climbers. According to the Himalayan database, his climbing resume included 30 expeditions starting in 2001. He had summited Makalu, the 5th highest mountain on Earth, multiple times. In 2016, he climbed Manaslu. In 2017, he stood on the summit of Everest itself at 8,849 meters, the roof of the world. For 25 years, Lakpa Dende's job was to put his body through conditions that the human body was never designed to survive. Every season, he climbed into the death zone altitudes above 8,000 meters, where the air contains roughly a third of the oxygen available at sea level, where the body cannot acclimatize, where every system from the heart to the brain to the blood is operating under chronic, repeated stress. This isn't a one-time event for a guide like Lakpa Dende. This is a yearly cycle, repeated for decades. The cardiovascular strain of high-altitude exposure, repeated year after year, leaves marks that don't show up until they do. Thane Swore Guragai, the managing director of 7 Summit Treks, gave a statement after Lakpa Dende's death. Lakpa Dende was a part of our family. He's worked with us for well over a decade. This wasn't a corporate platitude. In the world of Himalayan expedition companies, the relationship between operators and their high-altitude guides is genuinely close. These are the men who fix the ropes, carry the loads, and keep clients alive on the world's most dangerous mountains, often for a fraction of what the climbers themselves pay for their expedition permits. Lakpa Dende had been doing this work for 7 summit treks for years, season after season, body absorbing the cost each time. Initial reports indicated that Lakpa Dende died of natural causes, language that in a mountaineering context almost always points toward a cardiac event. A heart that has spent 25 years working overtime at altitude, repeatedly subjected to low oxygen, cold, dehydration, and physical exertion at the edge of human tolerance, can fail anywhere. It doesn't need a summit. It doesn't need a storm. It can fail on a flat, easy 2-mile walk that a first-time trekker could complete without difficulty. Nepal police opened an investigation, as is standard procedure, but the early consensus among those who knew the terrain and knew Lakpa Dende was that this was the mountain calling in a debt that had been accumulating for a quarter of a century. His body was flown by helicopter to Lukla that same day, May 3rd. From Lukla, the process of returning him to his family in Gudul would begin, a village he had left behind season after season to support the expedition industry that brings hundreds of millions of dollars into Nepal's economy every year. An industry built almost entirely on the labor of men like him. What makes Lakpa Dende's death especially significant is what it represents for the 2026 season. This was the first fatality of the year on Everest's main route, and it happened before the climbing season had truly even begun. The Department of Tourism had issued climbing permits to nearly 1,000 people for the various 8,000-meter peaks that season, including over 400 for Everest alone. Every one of those permits represents a client who will rely on guides exactly like Lakpa Dende men, who will fix lines, carry oxygen bottles, break trail through the Khumbu icefall, and walk up and down this mountain dozens of times in a single season while their clients make one attempt. The story of Everest that gets told in documentaries and films is almost always about the summit, about the final push. The death zone, the photograph at 8,849 meters. But the story that doesn't get told is the cumulative cost paid by the men who make those summit photographs possible. Lakpa Dende didn't die reaching for glory. He didn't die in a dramatic rescue or a heroic last stand. He died walking to work, on the easiest part of the entire journey, because his body had simply run out of capacity to absorb what 25 years of this work demanded of it. In the days that followed, tributes came in from the climbing community, from clients he had guided, from fellow Sherpas, from the company that called him family. But for his family in Gudal, the tributes meant less than the reality. A husband, a father, a provider was gone. Not from a fall, not from an avalanche, not from a storm that made international headlines. From a walk he had done so many times that nobody, not him, not his employers, not anyone thought to consider it dangerous. This is the part of the Everest story that rarely gets attention. The mountain doesn't only kill people in the death zone during summit pushes. It kills slowly, through accumulation, through the invisible wear of 25 years of repeated extreme exposure. It kills men walking to base camp at the start of a season, men who have already given the mountain everything it could visibly take, and who still owed it more. Lakpa Dende Sherpa summited Everest. He summited Makalu. He summited Manaslu. He completed 30 expeditions across 25 years, and in the end, the mountain didn't need a storm or an avalanche or a crevasse to collect what it was owed. It just needed 2 miles of flat trail and a heart that had finally given everything it had left. I'm Isaac from the Mountain Takes. If you've ever given everything to something that slowly took more than it gave back, if you've ever wondered what the real cost of safe work at extreme altitude actually is, subscribe, because there are more stories about the people who make the mountains possible for everyone else and what those mountains take from them season after season until there is nothing left to take. I'll see you on the next descent.
Yeah.